Orlando. Okay. Uh, uh, Orlando.
Indeed, women are but children of larger growth.
Ah, but I consider woman to be a beautiful, romantic animal who should be adorned in furs and feathers, pearls and diamonds. Apart from my wife, of course, will insist upon attempting to learn Greek, which is so very unbecoming I can hardly tolerate her company at the breakfast table. Why do they do it?
Oh, every woman is at best a contradiction. And frankly, most women have no characters at all.
Hi everybody, welcome to AMV Books and Films. My name is April and today we're going to be going over Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Let me just say, coming off of the Brothers Karamazov and before that War and Peace, books that were 1,000 plus pages and 900 plus pages, and coming into Orlando, which is only about 300 plus pages, was a needed relief. And it was very lighthearted, very witty, and while you're reading it, you can totally feel Virginia Woolf's sense of humor and her freedom. It was a pleasure to read. Orlando follows the story of a young boy at first who imagines himself dashing off the heads of Moors as his father and grandfather had done. He hears a bell ring and realizes the queen is coming. He is favored of the queen, and when he gets older, she bestows titles, wealth, and properties upon him. Orlando is a bit of a ladies' man, though, and seduces many women. This enrages the queen. Orlando at this time meets a Russian princess by the name of Sasha, who he falls desperately in love with. They connect and they become lovers. Orlando's love for Sasha is passionate and he wants her to run away with him. But one night Orlando sees in the corner of his eye Sasha canoodling with a Russian peasant sailor, and this deeply affects him. He cries out in anguish and faints. Sasha is quick to deny anything, and Orlando reluctantly believes her. That night, Orlando and she plan to leave together at midnight, but Sasha never comes. In the dark, he sees her Russian ship sail away. Orlando is heartbroken and so decides to shut himself up in his mansion of hundreds of rooms, so he can only focus on his poetry. Eventually, he meets a poet by the name of Nick Green, who he befriends and allows to live in his home. Orlando learns from Green a bit of gossip and his attitude toward the contemporary writers such as Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, and he ridicules their works. After Green leaves, he writes a parody on Orlando about a rich nobleman who thinks he can write, and he deeply criticizes his work. Orlando is deeply embarrassed and heartbroken once again and destroys his work, all except his poem, The Oak Tree. Orlando then remodels his homes and has parties. At this time, he meets a Romanian archduchess by the name of Harriet. She makes advances on him, but Orlando is repulsed. He runs away and ends up in Constantinople, where he is made a duke. He goes back to being a ladies' man and falls into a trance for a few days. While he is in the trance, the Turkish army invades and robs him and sees him lying there, assuming he is dead. Many of his servants, when they see him, they sort of leave him be, and they notice that there is a deed of marriage to a Spanish dancer by the name of Rosina. As he sleeps, 3 witches or 3 enchantresses come into the room and bestow stereotypical womanly gifts or womanly traits upon him. And after 7 days, Orlando wakes up as a woman. But he isn't really perturbed by it. He grabs some clothes and joins the gypsies in the mountains of Turkey. The gypsies side-eye Orlando for her deep love of nature and her love for her home that has 300 rooms. She leaves before they can kill her. She goes back to England donning women's clothing, and everyone accepts her as Lady Orlando. She has a romantic entanglement with a captain, but it fizzles out. She sees the Archduchess Harriet again, but this time she realizes that he is a man, Archduke Harry. Archduke Harry purports that he has always been a man and that he has always been in love with Orlando. He proposes love to Orlando, and Orlando refuses him. She finally finds herself in the company of renowned writers such as Alexander Pope, Dryden, and Addison. She at first is enthralled, but realizes all she does is pour tea for them and listen to their neurotic stories. She finds them dull and uninterested in her thoughts. She eventually finds herself in the company of prostitutes and has a much better time with them while listening to their stories and inhabiting their space. 18th century ends, and then the 19th century begins. She sees all around that everyone is coupled up, and she feels a loneliness. She fancies herself nature's bride, or the Moor's bride, as she says. And as she is out on a walk, she falls and breaks her ankle. A man comes by and helps her. This man is Marmaduke Bonthrop Shelmerdine, Esquire. They recognize in each other a duality of genders. They know that they are meant for each other. They marry, and he returns to the sea. It is around this time, too, that she loses her home to the sons of Spanish dancer Rosina Pepita. Orlando finishes her poem The Oak Tree and meets in London Nick Green. He is still criticizing the contemporary writers such as Lord Tennyson, Browning, Carlyle, and praising Shakespeare and Marlowe and Johnson. He sees that Orlando has a manuscript of The Oak Tree. He takes it and likes it and says he'll publish it. At this moment, a bright light shines, and Orlando is struck on the head 10 times, and it is now the present in 1928. She is in the shop, and she is reminded of Sasha, which brings back a flood of memories. She thinks about her different selves, her different experiences and personalities, and the narrative becomes a sort of stream of consciousness of many voices. She sees a variety of images: the dead queen, an airplane overhead, and her husband coming off the ship, and a bird flying away. This is the end of the novel. So this novel sort of defies rigidity and conformity. It defies conformity to gender, to space, to time, to culture. It's really just a wonderful story. It's very fantasy, and it's very factual, and it's very personal, and it was a joy to read. So the first glaring theme of the novel, obviously, is the theme of gender fluidity. The novel starts off as with Orlando as a boy, and Orlando as a boy is in love with nature. He loves reading and writing, especially writing. He is a bit moody. He imagines himself as his grandfather and his father before him, dashing off the heads of Moors, and he is someone who wants to be someone great. He wants to be an adventurer and travel. And so in Virginia Woolf's criticism or commentary on gender follows Orlando as he transforms from a man to a woman. When Orlando wakes up and he realizes that she is now a woman, it really doesn't bother her. He's not perturbed by it whatsoever. He just puts on his clothes and walks out the door, and he's not startled. He's not shaken by it. He just lives his life because he feels that he is still the same on the inside. It's just the outward appearance is a bit different. So once he realizes he is a woman, he jets off and he lives with the gypsies. And there he finds a sense of solace. He loves nature. He's always sitting by the mountainside, peering at the sky, and just admiring the beauty of nature. The gypsies sort of side-eye his love of nature, and we'll talk a little bit about that theme of nature. So once Orlando leaves the gypsies and he goes back to England, he has to put on the skirt and the bodice and all of the women clothing, and he has to, well, we'll call her she, because in the novel, the narrator calls Orlando as she, so throughout the rest of the novel, she identifies Orlando as she. And so she notices the effect that she has on others. Aboard a ship, the sight of her bare legs distracts the sailor so much that he falls off the masthead. She kind of laughs at herself, and she starts realizing the sort of lot that women have in this life at this time in England, how women were sort of treated differently and not taken as seriously. There is this scene in the novel when she realizes she is a woman. She's heading back to England on a boat, and she realizes the sight of her legs is sort of tantalizing another sailor on the boat. And here she has this inner dialogue, and she's talking about how she just finds it so uncomfortable, and how she realizes that the sort of appeal that she has on another person, particularly the other sex of men. And she says to herself, if the sight of my ankles means death to an honest fellow who no doubt has a wife and family to support, I must in all humanity keep them covered. Yet her legs were among the chiefest of her beauties. And she fell to thinking what an odd pass we have come to when all a woman's beauty has to be kept covered, lest a sailor may fall from a masthead. A pox on them, she said. And then, so she goes on, and then she talks about how all I can do now as a woman, once I set foot on English soil, is to pour out tea and ask my lords how they like it. Do you take sugar? Do you take cream? To fall from a masthead because you see a woman's ankles, to dress up like Guy Fawkes and parade the streets so that women may praise you. So she's falling on the side of a woman. She sees the struggles of women. She sees that there are differences, and she kind of laughs to herself during this time. She's not being malicious or being angry, but she is noticing a difference, and she's just taking note of that. She says, ignorant and poor as we are compared with the other sex. So she is identifying herself now as a woman. Armored with every weapon as they are, while they debar us from even a knowledge of the alphabet. Still, they fall off from the masthead. Here she takes a great yawn and she falls asleep. So she sort of laughs to herself. There's nothing malicious or angry, but she is noticing a difference. Women do not have the same privileges as men. They do not have access to education or the right to vote. They are expected to pour tea and ask the men how they take their tea with sugar or cream. But she also realizes that they are also silly as well. They fall off mastheads when they see a beautiful woman's legs. And it's just a sort of funny part of the novel, a lighthearted part of the novel. Virginia Woolf sort of makes a criticism and commentary that it is the clothes that wear the person and not the person that wears the clothes. So that she knows, and Orlando, when she dresses as a man, as a woman, and goes out and she dresses as a man, she is treated as if she was a man. And then she notices the difference between now that she is wearing, women's clothing, that she is different, and that these differences of clothing kind of have an impact on the person who is wearing those clothes. And she says, and when we are paid compliments, it behooves us to make some return. Orlando curtsied, she complied, she flattered the good man's humors, as she would not have done had his neat breeches been a woman's skirts, and his braided coat a woman's satin bodice. Thus there is much to support the view that it is clothes that wear us, and we not them, and not we them. We may make them take the mold of arm or breast, but they mold our hearts, our brains, our tongues to their liking. So having now worn skirts for a considerable time, a certain change was visible in Orlando, which is to be found even in her face. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, that the clothes and the social... Basically what Virginia Woolf is saying is that gender is a social construct, that it's all on the outside. What we wear on the outside makes us conform to what gender we are supposed to be. I don't necessarily agree 100% with that. I feel like there are biological differences that one cannot simply just ignore, but it is a compelling case, right? When we do wear clothing, different styles of clothing, we do sort of transform, and this is what is happening to Orlando. The novel goes on to talk about how Orlando has both embodied male qualities and female qualities, and I should say stereotypical male qualities and stereotypical female qualities, because for me it is just all personality. The commentary on gender then follows Orlando as she becomes engulfed in the company of great writers. So she finally has the opportunity to be in the company of the people who she admires the most, is the literature community, the literati, as they say. So at this time, because her life spans, about 300 years. So back then it was Shakespeare and Marlowe who was popular, but so fast forward some years, and now it's Addison, Dryden, and Pope who she's admired, who are the contemporary writers of the time, and she finds herself in their company. And at first she is very excited to be in their company. She's surrounded by these great men whose occupation she's always admired, and she's always admired their works. She finds their works beautiful, but while she is there, she realizes that they look at her as the weaker sex. They look at her as someone whose opinion doesn't really matter. She's having an inner dialogue when she's surrounded by these great men, and she says, how future ages will envy me. It is safe to say that they are extremely uneasy at the present moment. But was this life quite so exciting, quite so flattering, quite so glorious as it sounds when the memoir writer has done his work upon it? For one thing, Orlando had a positive hatred of tea. So at this time, she's surrounded by the great men that she had admired, writers, right? Alexander Pope, we have Dryden, and we have Addison there. So she's there, and they're with her in her room, and she's pouring tea for them. And she at first realizes, wow, this is my life. I get to live this life. I get to be surrounded by such geniuses. And but while she's pouring tea, the book says, she goes on to say, women are but children of a larger growth. This is another man saying this. A man of sense only trifles with them, plays with them, humors and flatters them. She goes on to say, a woman knows well that, though a wit, meaning like a poet, sends her his poems, praises her judgment, solicits her criticism, and drinks her tea, this by no means signifies that he respects her opinions, admires her understanding, or will refuse, though the rapier is denied him, to run her through the body with his pen. So basically Virginia Woolf is saying, women are the recipients of such protestations of love, of the words of poets, and sometimes the poets, they're the subject. Women are the subject of many poets, brilliant writing. However, when it comes down to it, they don't really want the opinions of women. They don't really respect their thoughts on the matter, and they, view them as sort of lower, less than. This is what Virginia Woolf is saying at this time in this novel. So she goes home and she realizes these writers do not capture her attention. She does not really want to be surrounded by them. She goes home and she tries to put on men's clothing, and she goes down to, I think it's called Gerrard Street, to try to seduce a prostitute. And he meets Nell, who is a prostitute, and Nell lives on Gerrard Street, and Nell invites Orlando, who she thinks is a man at first, back up to her room. And once, Nell has gone on to the bathroom to make herself up and change her clothing to sort of, offer her services as a prostitute, Orlando comes out and he takes off his clothes and he reveals himself to be a woman. And when Nell sees this, she's absolutely just roaring with laughter. She's not at all bothered by this, and she says, "This is Nell talking. I'm by no means sorry to hear it," meaning Orlando's a woman. "For the plain Dunstable of the matter is that I'm not in the mood for the society of the other sex tonight. Indeed, I'm in the devil of a fix." So she pours some alcohol and she invites Orlando into her life. And Orlando at this time really likes being with Nell. And it's just fascinating that she's exchanging this high society, the lofty words of poets, the company of geniuses, and she's exchanging that for this tiny little lodging that's ill-lighted, ill-decorated amongst women. So it says, to be in the company of poor girls whose talk was larded with the commonest expressions of the streets. So there's a vast difference, but she loved being there. Orlando loved being in that space with these women, hearing their stories, and it just... this is where, you can totally see that Virginia Woolf's novel is a feminist novel. She praises the woman, the womanly, the one that a lot of people at that time considered less than as a man. She inhabited that space. She associated with these types of people who were always looked at as less than, right? And she just enveloped herself in the language, and she was really, she loved being in their company. So at the turn of the 19th century, and Orlando goes out into nature and into the moor, and she fancies herself the bride of the moor. She breaks her ankle, and along comes Shell, and immediately Shell and Orlando are attracted to each other, and they recognize in each other that they have a duality within them. That Shell on the outside is a man, but he has he has feminine qualities, and that is what is attracting Orlando to Shell. That is what is attracting Shell to Orlando, and vice versa. Hold on, I'm getting confused. All right, so when Orlando meets Shell in nature, and after she's broken her foot and he comes by and he helps her, they are immediately attracted to each other. And Orlando says, "Shell, you're a woman." And Shell says to Orlando, "Orlando, you're a man." And they recognize this duality of genders within each other. And that is why they are so attracted to each other, that they are meant to be. And it just goes to show what Virginia Woolf is saying, that indicating that some individuals have a mixture of feminine and masculine, and that is actually the ideal person. In the end, Orlando thinks of her 100 years of life, hundreds of years of life, and all the personality traits, the spaces she's inhabited, the loves both of men and women she has had, and all the voices within, and realizes that they are all her. So at the end of the novel, there is a notion of gender fluidity once again. There's these, at the end of the novel, she just looks back on her life, the many loves that she's had throughout her life, the different spaces that she's inhabited, the different cultures that she's engulfed herself in, and just the different personality traits. And she realizes that all of these experiences and all of these voices and all of these genders are her. An individual can identify as many and have many voices, which is a notion that lends its strength to the argument for, gender fluidity, multiple genders, and things like that, which I can understand, but I cannot completely get on board with, and more on that later. Okay, so the next theme is criticism of literature giants and the intelligentsia. Orlando and Woolf herself loved literature, loved the plays, the poems, the novels, and Orlando himself, the character, idolized these great men, these great literary figures, and he also fancied himself as a writer. And so, but in the novel, Woolf sort of criticizes the reverence of such men. There is a moment in the novel when Orlando is a man, early on in the novel, and Orlando sees this fat man at sitting at a table, and his shirt is all disheveled and dirty, and Virginia Woolf or Orlando purports that this is Shakespeare that's writing at the table. And sort of what Virginia Woolf is doing is she's subverting the notion of this great man, destroys the illusion of great men, that this is some sort of untouchable being. But no, Shakespeare is just like you and me. He has, his faults, and he has his, ways about him. So, and then later on, Nick Green. So I don't know if, it's hard to tell if Virginia Woolf really likes her character Nick Green. It seems like in times she does and in times she doesn't. So Nick Green sort of gossips about Shakespeare and Marlowe and Ben Jonson, and saying no wonder these men write these terrible plays such as Othello and Hamlet. And so Nick Green is criticizing Hamlet and Othello. And at that time, when early on in the novel, when those were the contemporary writers, Nick Green has a hard time accepting new ideas. He is sort of stuck in the ancient ways. He wants to revert back to how literature once was. And she's criticizing the literature critics who romanticize the past, who romanticize the ancient, and who are always reticent to look to the future or look to the now. And because, when you look to the future or look to the now, it can be a bit confusing. It could get a little bit scary, and we ourselves are the same way. When we look to the future, we really don't know what to say. But when we look at the past, we do know what to say because it's already past. We're afraid of the future. And Orlando is a modern being. She is a bit confusing to some. The story, the narrative, the story, her personal biography is a bit confusing and a bit frightening and a bit different. And so it's sort of Virginia Woolf is introducing this notion that Orlando is a modern being, something that's needed, something fresh, a breath of fresh air. She also makes a comment on the vanity of writers, the vanity and the neuroticism of great writers, and how they are, just like Shakespeare was at that dinner table, that they are flawed men who have their hang-ups too, right? When Lady Orlando comes into the company of Alexander Pope, Dryden, and Addison, she invites them over for tea, and she has them sit in a circular room so that she arranges their portraits in a circle, that the portraits are all facing each other. And she does this because she does not want to offend any of the authors, right? And argue over, why is his portrait first? Why is my portrait last? So she's making a comment, or Virginia Woolf is making a comment on the sort of neuroticism and the vanity and the sensitive nature and frailty of writers. Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is nature, the theme of nature. And Virginia Woolf only lightly touches upon nature as a sort of source of safety and light and truth for Orlando. And this is throughout all his life, her life, his life. Even as a young boy, Orlando could be found always in nature, within the trees, by the stream, in the mountains. This is what he loves. This is what gives him life. And Orlando's love of nature never really goes away. When he becomes a woman, the first thing she does is run away with the gypsies to live with them in the mountains. And the gypsies were kind of suspicious of Orlando's love of nature. They could not understand it. They saw her when she was just sitting on the mountainside looking at the sky or the trees or the skyline, that she was almost in a trance. And they could not understand why someone would love nature so much when nature was just completely cruel and had been cruel to them, which is a fascinating theme, and I wish there was more of a fleshing out of this theme. But it also goes back to this theme, and in Robert Frost's poems, like, there are notions that nature is cruel and nature is unkind, but for Orlando, nature is a source of energy and strength and renewal, a source of truth. And this also harkens to other forms of literature, to American literature as well, that when you're out in nature, you are not in the confines of conformity of society, and that you are more yourself in nature. And that's why Orlando, is just totally in love with nature. He or she feels her most self when she or he is in nature. It is no wonder that when she meets Shell, that they are out in nature, that both of them can be their true selves, that they both see each other for who they truly are, and that is because they are out of the boundaries of social confines and constrictions and rigidity. The only criticism that I feel that Virginia Woolf holds towards Orlando is she touches a little bit upon colonialism, a little bit. I wish she would have fleshed this out a bit more, but she does mention that when Orlando goes out with the gypsies, she realizes that the gypsies don't really understand her love of country. Well, they understand her love of country, but they don't understand her love of her 300-plus room home, because Orlando had been wealthy, and Orlando longs to return to that home. And it's not that they don't understand her. I'm sure that they do understand her, but they don't trust it. They feel there's a sense of entitlement, and it's just sort of baffling to them that Orlando's ancestors went about colonizing all these different places, because to the gypsies, the world belongs to everyone, and there really is no need to claim something as their own. So they kind of look at her with a bit of distrust. And it's just a sort of, it's a little theme, it's a brief theme that Virginia Woolf sort of touches upon but never really dives into, and I wish she would have. But, it is her story, so it doesn't really matter, right? So we come to the final theme of the meaning of life. Is life itself. Orlando's life as both man and woman spanned over centuries in vastly different places, cultures, experiences, and voices and personality traits. And she feels that ecstasy. She feels that this ecstasy of living all these different lives and having all these different voices and personality traits, that this is the meaning of life. The meaning of life is life itself. The sort of idea that Virginia Woolf purports throughout the novel. She presents Orlando's life in a sort of exaggerated form, or at least the narrators do. So Orlando's life as both man and woman spanned over centuries, vastly different places and cultures and different experiences. He or she has many different voices and personality traits, and Orlando feels that this ecstasy is the meaning of life, that this is the meaning of life, that her past loves, her heartbreaks, her sorrows, her struggles, her new experiences, her new ways of thinking, her change from a man to a woman is what is her life. And this could be said that this signifies that, harkening back to the theme of gender fluidity, that we can all have multiple voices and multiple personalities and multiple genders. I'm more inclined to think that what she's expressing is more personality based, because Virginia Woolf never really delves into the biological, and when she does not dive into the biological, she is probably claiming that it doesn't really matter, but in my opinion it does. whether we agree with this notion that gender differences are a social construct or they are biological, I think we can all agree on Virginia Woolf's notion that the meaning of life is life itself, that there are such beautiful experiences that we have throughout our life, the loves of our lives, the children and the families that we have, the relationships we have with people, the different spaces that we inhabit, the different cultures that we embody, are all part of the meaning of life. And I think that is a notion that we can all get on board with, that the meaning of life is beautiful, that the heartbreak and the sorrow and the different inhabitations of space and time and cultures, the many different opinions, the many different personality traits that we all may have, is the meaning of life. This is the essence, this is the minutia that makes up life, and that is to be celebrated. And that is what I got from Virginia Woolf's Orlando. Thank you so much for joining me in reading Virginia Woolf's Orlando. So for Book Club 2023, it is Alice Munro's Carried Away, which you can see here. I'm excited to read the book. It's also a shorter story, so that should be a welcome relief for all of us who have been reading hardcore, thick literature. Thank you for joining me. Make sure that you like and subscribe, and make sure that to leave a comment. What did you feel about Orlando? What are some things that you agreed with? What are some things that you didn't agree with? What are some moments that shocked you? What are some moments that made you laugh? It was truly a fun, lighthearted novel, at least at my end. So thank you so much, and we'll see you later.